So what about the house and the divorce? You might be thinking, I've lived in this house with my husband for years, but I just don't think I can do it during the divorce process. What do I do? And if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. That's what a lot of my female clients think about when it comes to the house and their divorce. So how is all of this stuff sorted out? Let me tell you. If you're wondering why you should listen to me, my name is board certified divorce attorney Christopher Bruce. All I deal with my law clients is helping my clients, typically female, navigate a difficult divorce process. So let's get into it. I'm going to give you my top 10 things to know about the house and leaving the house in the divorce process. Item number 1, let me just dispel a divorce myth right off the bat. In Florida, if you move out of the house, you don't lose rights to the house. One of the things I get asked most often by my clients is, hey Chris, don't I lose rights to the house if I move out? And the answer is no. The law may have been like that at some point in other states, but it hasn't been the law in Florida for at least 50 years. If you move out of the house, you don't waive claims to the property, so if you need to get out, you certainly can. Number 2 item when dealing with the house and the divorce, realize that you still have a claim to the house even if your name is not on the title to the property. As long as the house was acquired during the marriage, the house is what's called a marital asset, and you have a claim to the value of the property in the divorce, whether your name's on the title or not. Number 3, leave the house if you can during the divorce if you think that staying in the same home with your husband is going to compromise your ability to go through the divorce process. So where do you go if you leave? Let me tell you the options I've seen with my clients over the years. First, if you have a second home, a house that's somewhere else that you and your spouse own, sometimes that's an easy place to go, especially if it's a little bit of distance from where your spouse has to work. Odds are they're not going to want to go to that second home property if they have to stay in the primary home and go to work, things like that. Another option I've seen some of my clients do is just go on an extended road trip or vacation. Now look, not everybody has the resources to do this, but if you do, it can be a great way to escape your husband during the divorce while having a heck of a good time. And I've seen some of my clients do this in a way that really doesn't cost them all that much money. They just pack the things that they really want, they get into their car, and they drive to different places. I have one client that I really remember that did a little road trip basically all around the country for over a year, stopping in and staying with all of the friends that her husband basically kept her from having any relationship with during the marriage. She had a heck of a time. And being gone really doesn't affect the divorce process much. A lot of what happens, even in a heavily litigated divorce, can happen without you being present, or you can be in meetings by FaceTime or Zoom or things like that. And if worse comes to worse, you have to come back to town, big whoop, get on a plane, fly from where you're at, and then when it's done, you leave. The advantage is you have a great time and you're not around your husband. So if you don't have a second home and you're not going to have the ability to go on some extended vacation, what do? Well, some people will just move out. They'll find a place to rent. They'll live with friends, live with family. Word to the wise, if you are going to consider renting a place, make sure that you can afford the payments for at least a year. If you really doubt your ability to pay the rent, so to speak, and you can't secure financial commitments from other people to help you, my advice is probably should stay in the home. It's usually best to not have the day-to-day worry about whether you're going to be able to pay for your housing. I've seen, especially with my female clients, that this really weighs on them and sometimes makes them more likely to enter into a bad settlement deal just to get the case over with quicker so they have enough money to pay for their housing. I really don't want you to be allowing a short-term cash flow concern to distract you from making a very important long-term financial decision in your divorce settlement. Don't let that happen. So number 5, when it comes to the house during the divorce, what can you do to get your husband out? Well, there are a couple ways practically and through the legal process, none of which usually work, but you should know about. 1, you can ask your husband to leave. Sometimes they will. Usually, difficult men, the types of men that you'd want to move out of the house to get away from, aren't going to do what you ask. They know, whether it's because they're straight from hell or they're just a good negotiator, that if you want them to leave, that they should stay in the house, and it'll drive you crazy, maybe make you more likely to settle quicker for less money than you would if they were living outside of the house. But doesn't hurt to ask if you really want them out. Number 2, you should be aware that if there is domestic violence, or your husband does commit a crime against you, court orders can be issued that can make your husband Get out and stay out. This really takes something serious. You can't just manufacture a situation. But if you feel that you're not safe in the house, you should talk to an attorney as soon as possible. You can explore your options for possibly getting a restraining order that allows you to stay in the house and requires your husband to leave. Certainly, if he attacks you, you should consider calling the police, and through the criminal law process, a similar order can be entered. Finally, it is possible during the divorce case to seek a temporary order that requires your husband to leave. This order would give you what's called in legal terms exclusive temporary use and possession of the house. Practically, in South Florida, where I practice law, judges are hesitant to grant these motions unless it's shown that there's a lot of violence in the house, that there's things like yelling and screaming, typically in front of children. Usually we have a hard time getting most judges to require a husband to move out of a house unless there's kids and unless there's weird stuff going on or arguments going on in front of the kids. Number 6, let's talk about some strategies for living with your husband if that's what you have to do or if it's what you choose to do. For many of my clients, getting out of difficult relationships, if you stay in a physical relationship with your husband during the divorce, it can make things really confusing. My advice is to move out of the room if your husband will not. Find another room in the house, put a lock on the door so that you have some space and privacy, and generally just try to conduct yourself in a way to where you're not around your husband all that much outside of your room. And yeah, I mean, this might not be the most ideal way to live, but just think of it. Practically, you can spend a lot of time out of the house. And then when you're back at the house, usually if you're strategic, you can minimize the amount of times that you actually have to see, confront, talk with your husband. If you do stay in the house and you have any fears about your safety, one of the things you can consider doing is putting up cameras in the home. Ring makes a great camera. You can mount them up on the walls. Before you put up any cameras, you should talk to an attorney because depending on where you live, there's certain rules about the cameras and whether they can record video, whether they can record audio, whether they can record both. You want to make sure that you're not breaking any laws, but usually in most circumstances, at least in Florida, you can put up a camera that records without audio in your house. That way you'll have the video. If your husband does anything to you, you will have a video of what happened and then be able to pursue possibly one of those court orders that removes him from the home. Having cameras in those circumstances keeps them from doing things that reflect poorly on them when they're caught on video. 7, what are the options for dealing with the house in the divorce settlement? Usually there's 2 options. One is one of the spouses keeps the house, and the other option is the home is sold and the money from the house sale is divided based on a settlement agreement or court order. And pro tip here, if your spouse is going to keep the house, you need to make sure that your divorce settlement deals with the home being refinanced if there's a mortgage. What you don't want is your husband to keep the home in the divorce without something in a settlement agreement that requires him to get you off the mortgage in a certain period of time. How does this really work? Usually the settlement agreement will give your husband the opportunity to do what's called assume the mortgage. That means to deal directly with the bank to remove you from the mortgage and have him become exclusively responsible for making all the payments. I've seen my clients who can qualify financially be able to do this with some success in recent time, but this will just vary based on the lender and the particular phase of the economy that you're in when the divorce happens. The second way we see this go is having terms in the settlement agreement that require your husband to refinance the property to remove your name from the debt. Basically, they have to go get a new mortgage and pay off the old mortgage that you're associated with so that you're not on the hook for the housing payments. It's important to have your husband either assume the mortgage or refinance the current mortgage on the property because you don't want to have your credit affected. You don't want the situation where you can't go buy a new home using bank financing after the divorce because you're still associated with the debt on the home that your husband's keeping. That would definitely make you upset. A lot of these settlement agreements deal with this issue by saying that within a certain period of time, usually about 6 months to a year, that if your husband does not assume the mortgage or refinance to remove you from liability on the mortgage, the home is sold and the mortgage is paid off. This results in kind of wordy contracts, but it's all doable, and a lot of divorce lawyers deal with this regularly. So number 8, how do you sell a house with a difficult husband during a divorce? Well, usually lawyers will have a special agreement that goes through all of the mechanics of selling the property with a very difficult person like your husband. Some of these contracts are 8 or 10 pages long. They deal with everything from setting the listing price, setting the price that you have to accept an offer at, to who has to allow the realtor into the home, to basically every other thing you can imagine, like what happens if the house burns burns down? What happens if a hurricane comes before the home is sold? Who pays what for repairs recommended by their realtor? These contracts can go real in depth. A lot of lawyers, including my firm, will have pretty standardized contracts that deal with just about everything you could think of and more, that deal with just about everything you could think of when it comes to selling your house with a difficult husband in the middle of a divorce or right after one. These agreements on selling the house, the prices that you have to sell the house at, should be a separate contract that is not filed with the court. I say this because if these contracts are filed with the court, then people who are looking to buy the house can see which offers you're required to accept and use that to their advantage in negotiating a price to purchase the property. So number 9, how do you value a house in the divorce process? Well, the most common way to do it, the best way to do it, is to go get a residential real property appraisal. You'll usually end up paying, depending on the property and where you're at in the country, somewhere between $500 to $1,500 for an appraiser to go out. They take a bunch of pictures of the property, they inspect the property inside, they learn about all of the different features and upgrades. They look at comparable sales in the area and the surrounding area, and they come up with what is usually a 5 to 15 page report on what the property is worth. In my experience, you really need one of those appraisal reports to negotiate the price for the home in a divorce settlement. I find that the value of the house is usually the thing that is fought over the most, and you're really going to get nowhere with your husband, or at least your husband's lawyer, if you don't have a property appraisal of the house. Some of my clients want to go and get a comparable sales analysis, or they want to print off the Zillow value or some other real estate website value, and usually that goes nowhere. Anybody can find a value that matches their position. So the best way to do it is to go out and get one of the reputable real estate appraisers in your area, one of the ones that the lawyers and judges are familiar with. Have them do an appraisal on the house. The money you pay on that is worth the assurance that you're valuing the house correctly. And even though there's a slight cost associated with the appraisal, you'll pay way more to your lawyer to argue over what the house is worth in a mediation or in settlement negotiations if you don't go get the appraisal. Finally, number 10, what do judges do if people can't agree on what happens with the house, or if there's a big fight over the value of the house? I find that a lot of judges are programmed by default to say, sell it, if people can't agree on who gets the property or if there's a big fight on the value of the property. Look, not every judge is going to feel that way, but I find with a lot of judges, they feel if there's a real dispute in value, or if there's a dispute on who should get the property, that the easiest thing to do is to list the property for sale. When the house sells, we'll know what the value is. And when the money comes from the sale, it can be divided in the way that the judge sees fit. So there you have it. That's the top 10 things you should know about the house and leaving the house in the divorce process. I hope this has been helpful to you. If you take away anything from this video, it's to really take the time to think about the house, whether you want to stay in it during the divorce, whether you want to keep it during the divorce. If not, where do you really want to live? Those issues are usually the biggest issues that come up in the divorce process and drive the settlement negotiations. So taking the time to think about those things in advance is well worth the effort. So what do you think about all this? Please let me know your thoughts. Put them in the comments below. If this video has been helpful, please click the button to subscribe. You'll also get notifications as we put out more divorce-related videos, which we do regularly. If you're at the point in time to where you feel you need to speak to an attorney, we welcome you getting in touch. We represent clients in the Southeast Florida area. That's basically Vero Beach, south to Miami, and a few other areas of the state. We're continuing to expand our service areas, so if you see this in a few years, we may be in a few other places. Also, before we go, I want to let you know, check out the links in the description. We have a lot of free resources, including about 5 different divorce books that you can download for free. And if you want hard copies, we can mail them to you or make them available for pickup at our office. I hope this has been helpful. My name's Chris Bruce. I'll see you next time.